Hey everybody, we're live. Welcome back to another Bitovi Frontend Training. With you as always is me, Justin Meyer, or mostly always. We're going to be talking about we. When I say we, I mean James and Chris. We'll be talking about the Bitballs application and how sessions work. You guys want to say hello? Hey Chris.
Hey guys.
Chris, where you pinging us from?
I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's a beautiful day.
Nice. Not so great in Chicago. Kind of dreary. What about you, James?
I'm from Southern Illinois, and it's also dreary here.
Dreary here, yeah. Like Carbondale, right? Something like that?
Carbondale, yep.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be talking about how to make sessions work in a DoneJS application. And we're also going to be, well, interestingly, I think, the cool thing about DoneJS is that sessions mostly work automatically. It's really about how you establish a session, make sure also know if you have a session established. But it works automatically with server-side rendering, and that's, to me, the crazy cool part. So let me just explain what I mean by that. Let's get into it. So here I have the... well, let me take even a step back first. So what we're going to be going through is the Bitballs example app, which can now, this guide can be found if you go to guides, and you can see example app, Bitballs. It's not totally complete yet. There's still some sections that I am hopefully going to finish writing this week. But the user sessions and access section is filled out. Data relationships is mostly filled out, so you can actually start learning about those things right now. And this application is a application that allows someone to a person who's not logged in to see a tournament, see like the teams for a tournament, see a list of games by round and by court for a tournament. And I just realized one of the tournaments has been deleted. Oh no, that makes me sad. One of the games has been deleted. I think Tom might have done that. It means I have to put up all the stats for a game. I got to talk to him, make sure he doesn't delete anything because it takes me a while to do all this.
Take away his admin privileges.
Yeah. Well, he's doing all the screenshots for me. So, anyways, here's a. Oh, this is. Yeah, I don't know. Weird. So this is what a game, and you can add stats, and you can. And you can click on a stat, and you can go right to that game. So this is when Brian Moshel's brother actually won the game of a two-pointer. It's kind of loud.
We don't hear the sound.
Oh, you don't hear the sound? Okay, good. Anyways, so you can go right to the game, and you can add stats. So once a person logs in, who's an admin, then they can create tournaments. They can edit the games, add stats, things like that. Let me kill this right now. There we go. So the cool thing, what I think is really amazing about DoneJS is that its server-side rendering works pretty much by default, thanks to a lot of hard work that James actually did. If you're using sessions based on cookies, but it's like a lot of sites that we've worked on in the past, like Sam's Club. It's server-side rendering for the home page and things like that. We don't server-side render stuff that's associated with a user's session, like their cart, because it would be expensive with our setup that we did for Sam's Club to server-side render that for every single page request. Okay, getter has to go. That's really obnoxious. I just have to deal with it. So what I'm saying is, like, we just server-side rendered the home page, but without a logged-in user. And then when a logged-in user like establishes a session through Ajax, once the client loads, then we kind of change what's going on for the user-centric parts. And we don't even server-side render like cart pages and things like that. DoneJS allows you, because of its high-performance server-side rendering, its high throughput server-side rendering, it's okay if you server-side render actual pages that are different for every single user. So if we actually look at this now that I'm logged in, and we refresh this, and we look at the network tab here, we'll see this tournament page will actually have like the logout. But if I actually log out, it'll also have the form controls too. If we look further down enough, we can see like the form controls for editing. But if we were to log out and then refresh the page, the server-side rendering will not have the logout. It'll have a login, create session, drop-down menu, and things like that, right? So it is actually using the session to render different pages based on a session. So that's to me a huge win for server-side rendering technology. Now let's go through how it works. So I'm going to kind of hit the highlights of the guide. So when a user is logged in, yeah, they get to see those controls, right? They don't see any ability to edit things unless they're a logged in admin. They also get other additional information once you're logged in, such as like I can allow other people to be admins, or I have an account and I guess I'm the first account ever created, even before we added the ability to verify your account, so I've never had to actually verify my account. But it still works because the first user is an admin user. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to kind of circle back to responsibilities. I'm going to talk about how creating a user works. Then I'm going to talk through how telling if the user has a session, telling if allowing the client to know if the user is already logged in, or logging in a user or logging out user, how all that works, basically creating sessions, getting the session, or destroying the session. And then I'll run through a little bit of how the server-side rendering logic works. Sound good, guys?
Yeah, sounds great.
Cool. So we'll start with what it takes to create a user. So I'm going to, I don't think I can delete from here, but I think I can delete my own account if I'm logged in as somebody else. So I'm going to log in as my other self, and I think I can delete my own account, which I'm going to do. Okay. So I probably could do this from the example app, or from the actual, I'm running one locally hosted right now too. Actually, I might do it from there, so I'm not messing any data up so let me try to do that actually. Let me log in. Oh, what did I do the password as? Maybe I'm not even registered. Since there's no tournaments, no players, I probably have never created an account. So perfect. I'm going to create a new account. So there's a form to register a new user that has a username and password. That looks like, so we have this user details component, and it has it has this form here that cross binds. So here's taking the label for the email. It's taking an input for the email, for the user's email. It's hooking up an input element to the user's email, and then it's also going somewhere to create a password. Yep, a password control. And then when that is submitted, it's going to call save user on details. And save user is going to prevent the default behavior so that the form isn't actually submitted. and it's going to call user save. This same save user is called, so you can actually edit your username and password. So the same control is used for editing a username and password. So that's why there's a little bit of additional logic versus just creating the session. But the big thing is I've got a user object already on the view model here. So if we look at the define properties, there's a user object that's created by default, an empty user, and that's what we're two-way binding to. So then we just call save on that once the user, once the email and password are present. And when the save is successful, we kind of are clearing out any sensitive information, making sure it's not there. And then we're going to set the session property on this component, which is two-way bound to the session property in the application view model, which we'll talk about. So basically, this is when a user is created, we automatically log in that user. It's pretty common, but their email hasn't been verified, so they might have limited access. This is a pretty common way of applications allow someone to like kind of, you want to let someone use your application as much as possible, even if they haven't verified an email, because you want high conversions. So this allows someone to be logged in right as they create the user. We're creating a session for them, but they really can't do much. But it's better than like having them actually have to check their email right away. Anyway, so this save, this is going to use the user model, the client model, and do a post to services users. We have our services are in the services folder, and we have a users, we have a express middleware that handles when someone posts, where is it? When someone posts to services users, this is going to check and make sure that the password, if there actually is a password, and warn them that there isn't a password. And then it's going to we're using Passport to manage authentication. In retrospect, we probably didn't have to add this to Bitballs. My goal eventually is to some point make it so people can log in with Twitter, and then using Passport is actually kind of beneficial because it has different authentication strategies for Twitter and Facebook and allowing people to log in from those services. This Passport Authenticates signup, I think this is this method right here. Basically, we're going to create a server-side model user. We're going to check if there's already a user created by that name. If there is, we're going to kind of throw warnings. Otherwise, we just do things like we're going to check if it's the first user ever created. Where is that number? So we're getting the total number of users. If the total number of users is 0, we create the first person as an admin just because someone's got to be an admin. So we create that user, and then we save it to the database, and then we tell, like, okay, this is the strategy for this is just normal email password strategy, filling out and saving to the database. So once we've done that, Passport will call this next function with the request and the response. It'll also set the user property to like the serialized user object we created. And using that, we create an email, and we're using node mail to send that person an email that has a verification, includes a URL to a verification hash. So with that, I can create a new user. I'm going to say Bitovi for life, the password. And it's going to say, send me an email. Now, since I'm on the development server, it's not actually going to send me an email. We have a little hosted email service running at this URL here. Because, what was it, James? It's just like, for some reason, emails don't like to get sent out from, ISPs, basically. It won't actually end up in your Gmail.
Yeah, they block port 25 sometimes, or they have specific rules that you have to use it, but it's easier just to install something like this with NPM.
Yeah, so when we start the application in development mode, we host this little mail dev server that just traps all outgoing emails. And then we can verify your email address. So verifying your email address brings us back to that same kind of user details page, but now it's like under the account URL. This isn't really important. All that really matters, because we're talking about sessions today, not necessarily creating users. What we really want to have is a user entry in the database, and now we have that, and the email is verified. I guess we can give a little bit more. There's that we have the special services verify email service that takes the ID of the user and their verification hash. I think does this also log the person in if you come at it from this angle? I don't know.
They're already logged in at that point. I don't think it does, because if you click on it right after you join, because when you register, you're logged in.
But if I wasn't logged in, if I had like logged out and then sometime later checked my email, that might be an improvement to make later, is to have this person also be logged in. So now that I've created an account, I'm gonna say I'm logged out. Okay, so I'm logged out. All I can see is nothing. I can't edit anything because I'm logged out, but I can read all the data. Okay, so how does the app know that I'm logged out? We put this is kind of like central data that really is going to be shared by everything, which is, what is your current session? So we have a session model that can goes to a session service that will make a request to services/session, and that will tell it using the cookie, if there is a cookie, because all requests are going to be made with a cookie. If there is a cookie, it will come back with information about that session, specifically which user the session is for. Now I'm not logged in right now, so if I check unfortunately, it's hard to show this because there won't be a network request because I'm doing server-side rendering. But it will come back in the response, the request data. So maybe I can just show this. So, well, let me show the code too. So in our application view model, which is here, we have a session property that is going to try to get the current session, just make a get request to services/session. And if that's successful, it's going to save that session instance as the session property on the application view model. And oh, look at that. The new iOS gets big when you do that. The mouse, crazy. That's fun. I could do that all day. Woo! Okay, back to the topic at hand. Okay, so this session property is really what we want to set if there is a session. There isn't a session right now, but I do want to kind of like just kind of sneak in this session. Using this session, we're kind of passing this along to some of our other components to let our components know if the person's logged in or not. Sometimes we just pass the session property has also like an admin property, and sometimes components just need to know if the current user is an admin user. So sometimes we pass that as well. But we'll come back to that. So right now, it's going to make an AJAX request to get the session. And let's look at the session service. Well, right now it's just going to error. And if we check our response, server-side response, we should actually see the because when things are server-side rendered in with DoneJS, all AJAX requests are trapped, and the responses are kind of added into the page in this XHR cache. Let me copy that, and we can see what was put in the XHR cache. Come on. do okay, so we can see that our requests, our page, our services players, our players page actually makes 2 requests made server side, and our client run in the server. I know it's confusing. It's hard for me to even start. I'm glad I'm practicing trying to explain this to people. The client, when it's run server side, is making that request to services session. It's getting a 404. There is no session, which means that callback is on the app view model. This is never actually called back, so there's never a session property on our application view model. And because there's never a session property on our application view model, if we look at how the navigation page is past the actual application view model as its app property. So the navigation page,
Navigation component
just checks like, hey, if there is a session, then you're going to, make sure get my ifs lined up. If there is a session, well, then you're going to show the logout button. If there's not a session, you're going to create a little login control. So that's kind of how it works. It's like if the application view model has a session property, well, that some form of that session is getting passed down to all of the subcomponents, and they can make the decision what to show here, to show login or to show logout. Now the cool thing is that the client side doesn't actually make those. It tries to make those requests, but they're all trapped by the. Hold on 1 second. Here, I'm gonna kill the. Where is? I'm trying to get to the chat room so I can like kill it, so I don't have to keep seeing that pop up. All right, here we go. Maybe only now it will show up. Hopefully. Okay, so that's basically how it works. Is we try to create the session object and we pass some form of that session object to all of the subcomponents, and the subcomponents use that to make decisions. Right. The cool thing also, what I really like about it, or what I was getting to, is that the what I really like about it is that the I'm trying to find my application. This one? Okay, there we go. What I really like about it is that its ability to trap the XHR requests and then not have to remake them. Even the 404s are caught, and the client doesn't remake those. The other thing I really like is that because...
Sorry, can you repeat that again? I didn't follow that part.
Yeah, so there's a... Remember, when the client is rendering server side, it's making the AJAX request to get the session. Where did that go? It's making an AJAX request to get the session, right?
Right.
Now, when the same code needs to run on the client. Okay. How do I get rid of that? Sorry. It's really distracting me. I'm just going to kill this. There you go. Maybe it'll go away now. So this is making an AJAX request. But it's a 400. It's getting a 404 because there is no session.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But when the app is run on the client, right, the same code is all rerun in the client. It's like really the same code is kind of run twice. First server side, and the same code is going to be run on the client to get to the eventual state that the app should be shown in.
That's right. Okay.
But part of that involves making that same AJAX request again for seeing if there's a session. Well, we put inside that object that what was it called? Inside this XHR cache here, we put all of the requests the client is making, even the 400s, so that even when it tries to make a AJAX request for the session that isn't there, when it kind of the client is rerunning, well, it'll just say, oh, well, I got a 400 without actually having to make the AJAX request.
So
again.
the server provides the client with the responses from the requests that the server already made to server-side render the content. Got it.
Yep. Even the 400s, even the errors.
Clever.
Because that's what it takes to like know that there's no session. So it makes it faster because then you're not waiting for the client to make the same AJAX request that it kind of already has made on the server. So that's really cool. I guess I was going in a little bit into the server-side rendering bits, but that's still cool. Let's talk about how the session. So this session request is getting made. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So we have session, and now one thing is all of our other services are plural, right? We have a game service that will give you, you go to services/games, it's going to give you every single game that matches what your query is. Session is singular because, well, the vast majority of applications you can have only like one login at one time. Like Google allows you to have kind of different sessions actually, but most apps there's no need to get sessions. What are the sessions for the current user? There's like one session, so that's why it's session. So if we want to tell, if the user wants to know if they're logged in or not, well, they go here, and we are going to check. This is something that the Passport adds. It adds this user property to all requests. If there is a user property, we're going to send back, well, this ID shouldn't be here. This is actually a bug. I don't know if one of you guys want to take a quick note of that. That definitely doesn't need to be there. Shouldn't be there.
I think that's for the.
Oh yeah, that's still okay. That's probably more of a bug in Can Connect then. I get why that's for there. So good call, James. So Can Connect obviously really likes it if you have IDs on things. This might actually not be needed anymore now that the strategy is different for how data is cached. James, if you know what I mean, now that we're using the old way, we needed an ID on every request to know, like, to put it in that inline cache. But now that we're using the...
It's also to determine if, when you save, if it's posting or if it's putting.
Oh, that's true. That's true, too. We might create a virtual ID, might be a better way in the client. Yeah, okay. Create an ID is a nice workaround for maybe that little problem. Okay, good to do until we figure out a better... Maybe we need a session type behavior for Can Connect. So this is really to work around some of the stuff that Can Connect really wants, is it wants to have an ID on everything. But here's the really important part, though, is a session is not a user. So a session has a user, right? We don't put like the user's name and email or things like that on the actual session object. Instead, we put it on a nested user property. So the data for a login comes like, let me make sure what was it? It was Bitovi for life. Now if I look at my network, you should see that session was created. And you see the data comes back with a user property. Why isn't the ID property on here then? Maybe I don't have the... Oh, let's for get. Okay, for post it's not going to do that. Okay. So when we actually comes time to create a session, we're doing the same thing. So basically, the big thing I'm trying to say is a session has a user. A session really doesn't have very much data of its own. Sometimes maybe it'll have like when it's created or when the session expires, but that is distinct data from a user property. So because it has a user and a user is a different entity altogether, when we create our session model for the client, you can see here we use the define plugin to say, hey, the user property is of type user. So any other helpers that might be on a user, then we can do session.user. Well, in this case, there are no real helpers on a user. But if I wanted to add one like can do something, some helper, like some ACL type functionality, because maybe users had stuff like maybe there's like noun and verb, maybe like user can delete player. You could say like, you can make a method here, and you could say like, well, through your ACL, maybe there's a user, maybe you're sending back a access control list on this nested user object. You could do like on your ACL, you could say, filter if the ACL list has like there's abilities, and you could say return ability dot noun equals noun, and ability dot verb is equal to verb. This way you could actually see if the person has the right to do something. You could have helper methods on your user. And this is a big thing we talk about in the next section, we'll maybe talk about next week or the week after, is how to deal with relationships. And that's a really important thing, is sessions have a user. And keep those two entities distinct in your services and in your models. That's really the big point that I'm trying to make here. Let me do that. So let's just go through the walkthrough again, is what happened when the let's go through what happens again. So when you refresh, it's going to always make a request to tell you if the user is logged in or not. And based on that, we write out the app differently. One also cool thing that I want to point out is that if I hit this login button, this is the great thing about live binding, is that when I hit this login button, it's going to essentially set a session. The navigation component is going to set its session property, which is two-way bound. It's going to set the app's session property, which is two-way bound to the actual like application view model session property. So we're actually updating the application view model session property when we log in. But because a representation of that is passed to every other component, when we log in, the app doesn't have to reload or anything. Just suddenly the admin functionality just becomes present because of live binding. I really love those apps where you can like log in and then suddenly, well, you see what's there, and then you can log out and then it goes away. Right? You get both views. That's the power that this technique offers us. So yeah, the login button, just to kind of wrap things up here, the login button, as we saw, creates login button calls this create session. Oh, we were talking about users, so yeah, let me show this. Let me show the login button. Login is in navigation.stash. There's this form. If the user is not, like basically if the session, if there's not a session, it creates this form, and the input, this is this drop down right here, creates a form for that, and it connects a default empty session with a default empty user to the email input of the form and to the password input of the form. And then when submit happens, it calls create session. And in navigation, create session is going to get that default session and call save on it. You can see the default session is just we just create whenever this navigation view model is created, we create just an empty placeholder session that we can, and really user that we can use for just for two-way binding. We'll save that session, and when this session is saved, it's actually, let's take a look at the request it's going to make. So this is again going to be a little unusual. When a lot of times when people want to create a session, what they want to do is pass a email and password, right? Like directly as part of the post data, right? To create a session. But we don't do that. What do we do instead? Either James or Chris.
We create a user object on the client side and then just save that, or a session object on the client side and just save that session, which we'll post or put to the session service.
Yes, but it has a nested user in it.
Right.
Because the username, and that's the important thing. The username, whoop, I put in my password wrong. We should show how we also do error handling at some point. This was Bitovi forever. What's my password? Bitovi.
For life.
Huh?
Bitovi for life.
Oh, thank you.
I'm surprised you can't remember that. Isn't that all your passwords?
No. Okay, so we just created this session. Let's check out the. So that's the big point, is that we're not, the post data isn't like the username and password. Oh wait, that's the response. The post data is, it's got a user object with the nested properties on the user object, because the response that you get back is going to be the session, and session responses will have a nested user with, you know, additional information about the user that will get merged, right? So that's not what, this is a, I don't know, very common way I like to orchestrate the URLs is embrace the relationships between things. Don't try to make, well, yeah, because the session, really all that's needed is a username and password to create a session, well, then I'm just going to make the kind of properties it receives, email and password. No, make it, it's really getting the nested users properties, and the response, those line up then perfectly with the response, and relationships are maintained, right? I think that's a big problem I see when people do APIs, is they want to hide the relationships for some reason. I think that's a mistake in the long run. It's definitely a mistake when you're using something like CanJS or can connect, because when you have those relationships and they're well thought out, then then it's easier to say, well, these properties really belong. What they really belong on is a user object, and then it's easy to get that to create an actual user instance. Versus if it was just like coming back with it, then you'd have like a session that is also kind of a user. Blah. So now, when we refresh the page or do anything like that, it's going to make a request to get the session. Now we're going to see a session established, so that's why it still shows logout. The logout is really simple. We can take a look at that. There's a button for logging out somewhere. Here's the logout. Calls the logout function on click. Where is that again? No, navigation. And the logout code is going to get the session from the application view model, call destroy on it. It's also going to save the promise. This is just so that we can make sure someone can't hit log out multiple times really quick. We can prevent things like that. And then really what this should be doing, actually, I think, if it were a little bit better code, it would actually be waiting for the destroy to finish successfully before removing the session on the application view model. right? This would be a little bit better to make sure, like, there's a thing right now that everybody really likes, which is cool, to make it so that whenever a user does anything, there is no spinner, there is no like waiting for the thing to happen. I think that's really cool, but it gets really nasty then if a bug ever does happen to actually like let the user know to somehow back up their state. If I think if it were me writing an app from scratch, like I need to get something out that's in front of people, I would still always just wait for the request before kind of like updating the state, and then later I would make it so sure we're gonna make it look like the person's logged out immediately, but I'm gonna handle in the background, do something, we can change it to do this, but then in the background, if this fails, well then maybe I want to save the session here before I null it out. So maybe I'm going to save that session, and then sure I'll null it out. But then maybe I'm going to restore it here. If there's an error, I'm going to give a warning like, "Hey, buddy, you were not able to log out, but I'm still putting the session back on the application view model because that's really what the state is." So you can do that kind of stuff. It just requires more code. I feel like the code isn't worth it right in the very beginning because it's not going to be all straightforward. So this is probably how I would do things generally, is just wait till the session. Yeah, you should handle your errors. That's why we put the session promise here, because it's easy for us if like somehow login didn't go well. Well, the session promise is in the template, and we could just say like, well, where's the logout button? Right? They try to hit logout, and we could say like, well, if session promise is rejected, then you're gonna put in some. You're gonna say you're gonna show the reasons. Generally, you do something like this. The reason is the object. Then you have the message property on whatever the server sent back, and you could give that to the user. Anyways, in conclusion, it's all. I forgot the one thing before we get to the conclusion is just what the service looks like. Session logout service is really easy. This is something that Passport adds to log the user out. You just call logout, and we're just going to respond with an empty JSON object. And that's it. Pretty basic. Where's the? Oh yeah, sorry. I guess I didn't show the login service either. So when you post session, it's going to get the username and password. Look up the user, make sure the password is valid, and then call login on Passport. And then if Passport was successful, we're going to send back the session object with its nested user property, and we're going to omit any sensitive data here. We probably should be omitting the verification hash too, maybe? I don't know what you think about that, James. But
yeah, it should be. I think it was at one point. I think there was a function that was supposed to clean them both at the same time.
So that's basically it. The service layer, it should be really straightforward for the most part to log in and out users. I think the big mistake people make is not understanding that users and sessions are two distinct services. And not having just like AJAX. It's okay for an AJAX request to go out and just say, hey, what's the session with every page request? Because that's part of the data that is needed to render the page. Okay, so we kind of talked about the server-side rendering. I don't know if you guys have any questions about how that worked. James, I don't know if you want to take a stab at talking about the cookie stuff. What happens with cookies? So,
well, it's been a minute, but we we use can simple DOM in the SSR, and we kind of like added a document cookie, a document.cookie polyfill in addition to on top of can SSR or on top of can simple DOM using can SSR. So any requests or anything that relies on document.cookie, that's always going to be updated, and it's going to be kept in sync with the ultimate response that comes through from the server. Because when you send out a request to render a page in SSR, that page has to make its own AJAX requests, and those might be setting cookies. So you have to keep
getting cookies.
Yeah, but the AJAX request that you make during SSR might set a cookie, and then it'll get it back to the document that
in a normal app, it will never set a cookie because it's always get-based requests or server-side render. I guess maybe I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I understand what you're saying now, actually.
Yeah, because if you the initial SSR request might have its own AJAX request, and you have to track the cookie manipulation through all of that and set it on the simple DOM, and then it returns for everything.
Yeah, it's not so much the cookie manipulation. Let me try to take a stab at explaining it, because it's really complex, but it's awesome that this is how DoneJS works. So when you server-side render a page, and let's just take, I'm going to server-side render the player's page, right? And it's got this form because I'm logged in. Okay, when you refresh this page, the initial request for players is actually going to have the cookie on it, right? The cookie that Passport under the hood understands that, hey, if this cookie comes with a request, that I can use to look up the current session and the current user for that session. Now the problem is when you're running when the code is running on the server side, so when the application view model is going to say, hey, get me the session, it's going to make an AJAX request. You need to make sure that the AJAX request that's being created on the server includes the same cookie that was part of the initial page's cookie. So like this cookie is coming from the browser here. When you hit enter, there's a cookie that all requests are made with, including the initial page request. You need to tack that on any AJAX requests that are coming out during server-side rendering. And that's something that James worked and made happen, which makes it so that, for the most part, as long as you're using cookies for your sessions should just work. Any cookie that's on your going to be made as part of any like page requests or going from one page to the next, anything that's there, those will also be tacked onto any AJAX requests during server-side rendering. So it's quite cool, I think.
We didn't just stop there though, because if you had an application like on Reddit that recently viewed sub or topics that's tracked by cookies, it's not stored on their server. So during a server-side request, if you were hitting up a new topic, it would be creating a cookie that would be sent back eventually from the server-side request call. So those also are implemented to get tracked. So we're not just creating requests; it's also for creating and deleting if a cookie expires. It's the same as setting a cookie.
So, So you wired it up to look for the new cookie and send that back as part of the response headers.
Yep. Anytime a cookie is manipulated, the whole thing is captured and is made accurate through the end result of an SSR event.
Crazy. Cool. Yeah, so that's it. I mean, for the most part, it might have seemed complex because we talked about it for an hour, but I think it's actually, there's a lot of complex underneath, but just create a user service to create users and a session service to get, create, and destroy sessions, and make the session part of your, retrieving the session part of your application view model, pass that down to all your components, and then you really do have, that's how you should manage logging in and logging out and access control rights and things like that. So I think it's pretty good way of doing it. Cool. Well, thanks, James. Thanks, Chris. Thanks everybody for watching. The full guide should probably be out by the end of the week, so definitely check it out. And see everybody next week.